Welcome to the Edges of Lean. I'm Bella Engelbach, and in this podcast we explore the human and creative side of lean thinking, unusual places where lean thinking is practiced. We meet people who are practicing continuous improvement in many different flavors and styles. So come along with me on a journey to the edges of lean.
Episode 39, Continuous Improvement and Collaborative Leadership with Teri Beckman. Teri Beckman is quick to say that she's not a lean practitioner, but she really cares about what lean practitioners are doing, and she has many insights that the lean community would benefit from hearing. So I'm glad to have her today. Teri is CEO of HIGOl, where she helps purpose-driven CEOs align their board, their people, and their financial resources to increase revenue and community impact. Teri Beckman, welcome to the Edges of Lean.
Oh, thank you, Bella. It's so nice to be here.
I'd love it if you could tell us about Teri. What are you doing and how did you get to do what you're doing?
Oh, well, thank you. Yes, I have a company called HIGOL, which is an acronym for High Impact Growth Oriented Leaders. And we work with purpose-driven companies and their CEOs to basically to help them align their resources so that they can have the kind of community impact they want to have, as well as increase their revenue. And we generally see those things measurably increase by about 50% over 12 months if we have a chance to work with folks for a while. So it's been a lot of fun.
That's terrific. And so how did you get into this?
How did I get into it? Really good question. I worked for a number of years as an executive director of a larger nonprofit that was doing all kinds of community impact work in neighborhoods and inside real estate. And it was a high burnout job for sure. And what I really noticed was as I, got the training and coaching and read, books that made sense to me, I could see that as my mind, the capacity of my mind increased, then so did my capacity to do my job. And it really wasn't so much about the technical aspect of the work. There were plenty of resources to figure that out. It was really about, in a sense, in the end, really my own leadership capacity. That's what really, portended and, supported my ability to take on bigger projects. And so a big part of that also was inside of Buddhist psychology. So I learned really that those masters are masters of psychology, in a way that many of us in the West are not. And so that was also a big part of my growth. I eventually decided that, helping other people on that path would be the biggest thing I could give back to the nonprofit and larger business community. So that's really how the genesis of how it came.
What's fascinating to me about that is the connection with Buddhism, because in lean, we practice a way of working, which comes from Japan, and the people who came up with this have that Buddhist background. And, there is this ethos, I think, that goes with that, as you said, is hard for us to understand in the West. It's a different approach to life and a different way of thinking. So when we're trying to learn what we think of as lean or continuous improvement that's based at least on the way that Toyota works, it's very hard for those of us in the West to understand that underlying ethos, that underlying way of thinking.
Yeah. It was so interesting to me when you shared that, because I had no idea lean came from a Buddhist foundation like that. So that's inspiring to me. I think unfortunately with many things in the United States, we squeeze it into, we Americanize it, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes we lose the best part of things doing that.
Well, it's certainly been true with lean, and I'm using the term, kind of broadly here, that there's been a big focus on the results. And look at these results, and aren't these results amazing? And now we're seeing a turning towards, it's not just about the results or about a technical tool, it's about understanding the thinking behind that. And because you can't have your own amazing results consistently if you don't understand the thinking. And then the thinking, I think, is hard, because it's not just an accretion of just how do we think in the West, but it's also about, a focus in business that is always on cost reduction and, making things efficient, but not always making things efficient, for the reasons that perhaps somebody in another culture might want to make things efficient. Yeah. So when you and I were talking previously, you told me that sometimes in organizations you work with people who you call lean refugees. So tell us who a lean refugee is.
Yes. Well, we kind of coined the term lean refugee. I don't think they were using that term, but I think what happens in business, perhaps too often, is we forget what the real focus is. Like, we forget where we want to really anchor to get those results that you're talking about. I'm also a big fan of focusing on results. Big fan of that. It's really important, because that essentially sets the GPS for where you want to go, right? Is to be clear about the results. But if we're centering everything on efficiency and productivity, what we saw with kind of the lean refugees is they were very smart, bright people for sure, but they ended up, especially if they were in mid-management, sometimes very angry and kind of broken by this emphasis, this kind of sole emphasis on efficiency and productivity. Because human beings are not, they're not machines, they're not cogs. And folks would really get tired of feeling like they were being treated like a cog or, a widget in a sense. Which I think that's very unfortunate and common in large enterprises at times, that people have this sense. I think that's a big part of, the Great Resignation, right? And people having time to reflect on this and thinking, God, there's got to be something better out there. You can get even better results when your focus as a business is actually human-centered, right? Where the human being and the well-being of those individuals and their growth and learning how to unleash their potential, in a sense, right? Which makes sense. Unleashing their potential would help the company, right? You can even get better results, but it's you have to be very clear on where you're centering your efforts. Does that make, I don't know, did I answer your question?
It makes a lot of sense, Teri. One of the things that I see, or I have seen, when people start what they call a lean deployment, which is in itself not necessarily a term that I favor, is they teach lean through a game, and the game, and apologies to the people who created this game, is called Move It. And in the Move It game, people sit around the room, they're assigned different roles, and they're supposed to deliver packages to a customer. And of course, the process that they're given is a terrible process, and there's lots of opportunities to make mistakes. And over the course of the game, they learn to improve the process so that instead of taking 10, 15 minutes to deliver this package to the customer, they can do it in a few seconds. The result of the game almost always is that everybody at the end of the game has a different role. So think about that in real life. What is it like if at the end of what you've done, everybody has a completely new job? that's not the way it works in real organizations, right?
No.
If you think about the HR aspects of that, so even if people came up with the process themselves, they might not like the new job. They might feel that the change is happening too fast to them, and that's the kind of stuff I think that starts that feeling like we're just a cog in the wheel. It's all about making this as fast as possible. It's not about, am I doing a job I enjoy? Am I getting to express myself? Does this job still make sense to me? And that's just the beginning of it. So there's a lot of things I think that we in the Lean community need to look at and say, are we even teaching this in the right way? Are we teaching the wrong thing?
Oh, yes, that's interesting. Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, I can see the value of that kind of exercise, because there are a lot of inefficient processes out there.
Oh yeah.
For sure. But I think the questions you're raising are at a higher level and more important, right? In terms of, are you creating structures where people's voices actually can be heard, right? Because that's how you begin to unleash their potential. You want to hear their voice. Especially frontline managers, right? Because they're dealing with your business, right? They're the ones that are, really, interacting with customers. And I mean, they really understand what's working and what's not working. So, do you have a voice as an employee? Is your voice heard in a way that it's actually not just an exercise to be heard, but that, you actually have a role and a say in how goals get set, and how goals get implemented. Because it's not just a nice HR thing. It's not. It's actually how to unleash the potential of the company, because that's really where the knowledge lies, in how to make it better. Of course, there's also a role, for leadership in that, for sure. But it's often not what leadership thinks it is.
So what do you see when you go into an organization, and you said you like to work with purpose-driven organizations, but when you go into an organization, what do you see leaders typically thinking that their job is?
To, basically develop the plan and tell people, to do it.
Right.
And discipline them if they don't. Right. Yeah. And this isn't true of all companies, but, executive teams and executive leadership can just be very siloed and kind of in their own world, unfortunately. And that I feel that's honestly probably more common than not. And, when that happens, then you have cut off the potential of the company. I mean, a lot of companies keep operating like that, but those are not the companies that are, leading edge, innovative, technology. I mean, those are not, they're not the companies. Often those are the companies that buy the innovative companies and kind of destroy that spirit. So it just depends too on where you want to be. I think it's more the larger the company, the more challenging, but that's only because we've been focused in the wrong areas. So bad habits have, when they infiltrate very large companies, then it becomes harder to change them.
Well, and even in a large company too, I'm sure you see this. You could have a very good, positive culture in one area of the company, in one division, in one site,
Right.
one small group.
Right.
But not everybody's like that, so being able to get that to actually spread across the entire company, I mean, that is a C-level job, right?
It is a C-level job. Yeah. And if it's not happening at the C-level, it's not going to happen. I always say this shit rolls downhill.
There you go. There goes my G rating on Apple Podcasts.
Oh, sorry.
No, that's fine. That's fine. That's not a problem at all. All right. So you talk about collaborative leadership. So tell us what collaborative leadership is.
Collaborative leadership is, it's really where collaborative leadership is really, I think, where senior leadership and the executive team, for essentially the folks who are responsible for the bottom line results, that they recognize the interdependence of meeting their goals with all of their team members who report to them, essentially. Like when they really realize those interdependencies and then develop organizational structures that truly acknowledge and respect those interdependencies, then you start to get collaborative leadership. You start to get leadership where people's voices really are heard and can have, just can have incredible results, can just have incredible impact.
So when you go to an organization and talk to the people at the C-level people or a board about this, I can imagine people saying, yeah, I want that. I want those results. I can kind of see myself doing that, but I can imagine inside they might be a little scared. So what would be scary to them about that?
Well, what's really scary is a sense of giving up some of the control, right? I think that's absolutely the scariest thing. The sense of giving up control and authority, because their roles become more collaborative, right? They actually, their frontline leaders actually start, significantly contributing to the company. And so, and there's a collaborative communication that goes on, and there's a give and take. Who becomes the boss is the result, right? That you're going after. Part of it is really aligning everybody behind the result that you want to get in an honest, transparent way. And for many executives, that means, I'm not the boss anymore. The result is the boss. And that feels, that sounds good in theory, but in doing it, it is scary, because there's a feeling of giving up control, and how much can I really trust these people? And, they haven't always performed well at all before, and so there's a lot of, it's not for everybody. The leaders need to be willing to trust and be willing to develop different kinds of relationships with, their direct reports. Doesn't mean that the direct report is the boss. The result is the boss, and it doesn't mean that you don't, that there aren't results for people who are not performing. I'm also not saying that, but I think people are really tired of kind of the authoritarian top-down leadership. It worked well in our industrial age, perhaps, but that age is long gone now.
Yeah, in an age when more and more people are doing knowledge work,
yes,
it's definitely the person working for you may know things and know, well, that's true. It's true in industry too. The person working for you may know things or know how to do things or have skills that you absolutely don't have, right? So you have to be able to trust them to some extent. But as you were saying, if in the past you've seen people not perform well, that could be very worrying. So how far do you let it go? When do you stop people? When do you check in? How do you check in a way that's not making people feel like you're looking over their shoulder?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really good question, Bella. And I think, part of what we do is we like to go in and do pilots, honestly, pilot projects with this. So, it's nice to start with something like it's not swallowing the whole elephant, right, in one bite, because that usually just doesn't work. But if we could go in and work with the senior leadership and the frontline managers to really, one is to do some planning together, to go through a collaborative planning process, where, and this is great to do, every quarter even, where you're really looking carefully at like, well, what worked, what didn't work, what could be better. We have a little framework that allows teams to be able to go through this, and everyone's voice is recorded. And then we have ways of everyone being able to look at that, be able to have some real discussions about where we're going and what went well, where the challenges were, and then developing consensus around, so what are our strategic priorities now, for this quarter or for this year, where everyone in a sense has a voice into that. And what we see in that process is that there's a really interesting alignment that actually happens, because people are looking at the same things. Like, really, the knowledge is in your company around how to make it better. And so then what we'll do is, we'll pull out the strategic priorities that clearly most people feel are a priority. Now, the senior management can tweak that and say, well, yes, but, there may need to be some refinements, but it's often really very right on spot on. At that point, people are excited because they actually feel like they've had a say in setting the goals. And then what we'll do is encourage them to set up teams around those goals. Interdisciplinary teams are the best, right? To start to break down some of the silos that are often in larger organizations. And they get to self-select the goal they want to work on. So that's the other thing, right? They're not being told to work on a goal. They get to pick a goal that excites them. And then we help them to develop the meeting structures to facilitate getting to that goal within the time period that they're trying to get to. And we'll have a member of the executive team be on these goal teams, but they are not leading the team. So that's also a big shift for them, is to really be able to delegate, like, I'm not leading this, but they're there as conveners. So they're making sure that the meetings happen, and they bring the resources, so as the team develops, like, these are the resources we need to hit this goal, right? Then it'll go back to the executive team. The executive team member will take that back and advocate, right, for that goal team and what it needs. So there's discussion back and forth there. We will work to help develop we'll ask the team to pick a leader, and a leader and a facilitator and a note taker, essentially. And the leader's job is not to make the decisions. It's simply to set the agenda for the meetings and to make sure that the meetings continue to go. The facilitator is facilitating the discussion in the meeting, and everyone in those team goal meetings has a voice as well. And they're deciding together on, like, what are the changes we want to make? What are the next steps to be able to really hit this goal? And then there's regular meetings and check-ins back with the executive team from the leadership of the goal teams to make sure that there's an interconnected communication going on. So these goal teams are not getting away from the executive team, but they're driving the goals now. They're driving the goals, and man, you can get very quick results. That's where then the game comes in a sense, right? That you referenced at the beginning of our conversation. Then people are all looking at the process and they're like, holy whatever, this could be done much better.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So how could we make it better? And then you can bring in a tool, right? And say, yes, all right, if you use this, here's a possibility for a tool that you could think of that, you could try, see if it works. But don't start with the tools.
Don't start with the tool. Nothing changes if then you just have a tool in there and it just gets more confusing, right? Like you bring it into sort of a dysfunctional kind of corporate structure. So yeah, people first. You gotta get the people part first.
So one of the things I'm curious about, in my life in the big company, I worked in a very, very big company. And so we attempted to do something like this, with having objectives that were, started by leadership and feedback across the organization. But the organization was so different, was so huge. It's very difficult to get everybody's voices. So, but by the time an objective ended up with an individual or with a team, it was not necessarily with their input. And I wonder if you have some advice for people who is there a scale thing here that makes it
how do you scale
possible or difficult?
Right. I think part of the scaling may be in defining areas of authority in a sense, or areas of function, right? Like, for example, marketing is clearly a function, right, within a company. And so, and marketing in a sense, these subgroups can be delegated certain authority around particular objectives, right? So, we want sales to be at a certain level, right? We want revenue to be at a certain level. And how do we get there? And then, when those bigger, so you could say, well, maybe people within that are not setting those bigger goals. And it can start out that way, I think, Bella, where you've got a bigger goal that's being set at a different level, but there's a million ways to get there, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
And so then you can delegate down to that team. Okay, we don't care how you get there. I mean, it needs to be legal, obviously, but
right.
They can go through that process to really figure out how do they get to that objective. And when people start to really flex this muscle and get good at it, then, marketing and sales can have a huge impact, obviously, in the end on what revenue is and setting even those overall goals for a company potentially. At least having a lot of conversation with the executive team around that once this muscle is really built.
Yeah. I mean, if they really learned that collaborative leadership, then they can go, if we can't hit this number, if we don't have a new product, then they can go to, to product development and say, hey, you need a goal that's aligned with our goal, right? That's
Yeah, exactly. Well, and that's also part of the role of executive leadership, is to see where the interdependencies are across the company, right? So that, as those individual reporting lines are coming up then that's part of executive leadership's role, is really seeing, well, you need to talk to product development. We don't, product development is off on what they're doing. It's not going to generate us this kind of revenue. And so, then there's honest discussions about like what could happen then. Right. That kind of collaborative, those kind of conversations can unleash people's creativity, right? To think differently. Like if we're trying to hit this goal, then okay, well, what do we need to be doing in product development? And how long is it going to take to get there? So things start to get more real, versus just kind of barking orders from on high. Well, that you're not happy with this or you're not happy with that. You've got to get people talking and working together. Otherwise it doesn't work very well.
Yeah. So one of the things that I've talked about with other recent guests is about our educational system, and that people coming out of universities, coming out of business schools, have had limited experience in collaboration. And, so we're always, urging the academics out there to see what you can do to change that. I think academia has this competitive approach to it, as we all each get our own individual grade. And we know once you get out and you're working in a for-profit or a not-for-profit organization, it's not really about your individual grade. But I was wondering, do you have thoughts about what you would like to see in terms of education, preparing people for the future.
I couldn't agree with you more. I think our educational system is really lacking in this way. With it does feel, I think, especially in business schools, I mean, it's so hyper focused on the individual and the job that you're going to land and how much money you're going to make. And not to say that that's not important. I mean, individuals are really important because they make up the whole, right? But if we're not teaching our young adults, truly how to work together collaboratively, it's not portending well for our future, right? I mean, we can see that with just all of our recent crises are, I think, a result of that, right? Really. And those kinds of crises, like the pandemic, like global warming, all of those things ultimately have real bottom line effects on companies, right? COVID certainly has. And yeah, that's the things that we're talking about going on in individual companies are reflected in our larger society, which doesn't, make sense, right? That they would be, like the two reflect each other. And a lot of that does start in the universities for sure. And I don't see a lot of emphasis on how to actually work collaboratively, like how to really figure that out. What are structures for doing that? How do you really improve communication? Those things actually can be learned. And it would be wonderful if there were researchers actually interested, in how you do that in business. I don't know. I'm not sure I've ever seen that though, really.
I think it is happening, but the bulk of what's happening is still what you described. It's about, if you go to business school, especially, it is about your individual achievement, where you're going to work afterwards. And, there may be some collaborative projects, but it's not, I don't know that it's necessarily, taught or researched, but I know there is research happening on that. So,
oh, good. I'm glad to hear that. Yeah. When I have had friends who've gone through the MBA programs and doing projects, what it ends up being is there's like 2 or 3 stars who carry the whole project, and they complain endlessly about the freeloaders in the group. That seems to be the pattern that repeats over and over again.
And then those people get hired into a company and they repeat that pattern, right? Like I'm the only one who knows, I'm the one who's really working, and everybody else is not part of my team. So
right.
It would be great to get some better behavior, even starting out.
Yeah. And those students need to be taught how to collaborate together. Like, I don't think, like, there needs to be actually a discussion about that, and not just an assumption that they're going to figure it out, because they're not figuring it out.
No. So Teri, you spent a lot of time in a not-for-profit organization as an executive director. A lot of the things that we've been talking about I found everything we've been talking about are, of course, applicable to nonprofits as well. But in nonprofits, you have the additional challenge and joy of working with volunteers. What you're talking about with collaborative leadership, how do you engage volunteers in that?
Well, it's the same thing. Volunteers are human beings as well,
Yeah.
And I think, it's exactly the same. So it depends on, I really encourage organizations to think about their volunteers intentionally, right? Like very intentionally. What is their role in the organization, and almost, treating them, I want to say with the same respect and value as an employee, right? Unfortunately, we don't necessarily respect and value our employees either, but that's ideal. Because when you're, when you give them that kind of respect, they respect you back, right? Like you're setting up the expectation for what this relationship is going to look like. And it is a relationship. And because you're not paying for it, it's particularly a valuable relationship. And so, depending on the volunteers' abilities and time, right, with the time that they're willing to commit to you, you want to integrate them into the organization as much as possible. Be sure that they understand your vision and mission and your bigger goals, right? Where you're really headed towards, so that they can see how their role is going to contribute to that, significantly. There's many organizations that treat their volunteers like cogs. And, then you're going to lose them. That's not a retention strategy. And they can be part of the collaborative leadership structure as well. Again, it depends on the circumstance and how much time, again, that they are able to donate to the organization. But I've seen, board members who are volunteers in nonprofit organizations, certainly be just as engaged as, the paid team members and contribute just as much. So, and that's a real bonus for the organization when you can get that kind of engagement.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's something that is, there's more work to do out there than there ever seems like there's people and money to do it. So what you're talking about with engaging volunteers and like really engaging volunteers and not just, thanking them at the end of the year.
Right.
Sounds like it's really, really needed.
Yeah. It makes a really big difference. Many nonprofit CEOs and executive directors, the board is just a great example because they have a very important governance role, but they're unpaid. They are
Right.
volunteers. And, many executive directors, like the board is kind of the bane of their existence. They complain a lot about it. They wish they didn't have to deal with it, but it's actually the biggest, most underutilized asset of a nonprofit organization. And learning how to really work effectively with those volunteers will have huge financial benefits for the organization. It absolutely affects the bottom line, but you've got to, again, prioritize them. Like it's prioritizing the human beings and the relationships that you're developing with those folks and seeing where are their interests and how do their interests and vision overlap with the organization's, vision and interests, and then really creating opportunities for them in those places. So there's a lot there that can be developed for sure.
But but the same thing that you were saying, for an a director, an executive director, it's about kind of flipping that relationship around then, right? It's about perhaps letting go some things or working in a different way with the board or with other volunteers.
Yes, Bella. Yes. It's like, a lot of times it's funny because executive directors will feel like, they'll have board meetings quarterly or bi-monthly. Some of them will meet even every month. And they'll feel like their job is to stand up and read a report to show that they're doing their job, right? Because the board hires the executive directors. So I got to show them that I'm doing my job and I'm going to read this report that I already sent them. Like these people don't know how to read, right? And of course you're training them not to read. Like, why should I read this package if they're going to read it to me when I get to the meeting? And it's so boring. Oh my God, it's so boring. And so the relationship shift, like you're saying, is being willing to be vulnerable with the board and to actually have some real white space in your agenda to allow the board to think strategically and have conversations where you don't know where the end of the conversation is going to go. And that unleashes the potential of the board, right? Because if you're asking them to really advise you on strategic, roadblocks or goals that you're trying to achieve, you don't know what the answer is going to be, right? So that, that requires being vulnerable with them and maybe you not having all of the answers and, developing a true partnership. Very similar to the question around what's the executive team lose when they move in this direction. I think for all of us, it's like getting the ego out of the way so that you can deeply partner with people around important objectives.
I love that. Getting the ego out of the way. It's easy to say, it's hard to do.
Yes.
Because we live with us. We live with ourselves. We are we're the only reality we know.
That's right. Yeah. And, we want to have an awareness of that. And it's not like we're trying to throw our analytical abilities out the window. For sure not. They're very valuable to us. But we have to also realize maybe we don't know everything. And maybe that's really, really okay. Maybe that's really, being able, a lot of times I'll say, being able to say, I don't know is the beginning of really getting someplace, because life is like that. These things are constantly changing. How could we know all the answers? It's impossible.
And that is a very lean perspective, actually.
Oh, great.
It really is, knowing that we don't know and we have to do something to find out. That is the beginning of learning.
Yeah. You
can't learn something if you don't know that you don't know it.
Exactly. Right.
Teri, we talked a little bit about education, but thinking about young people starting out in their career, what would be your piece of advice to somebody if you could just give them one piece of advice?
Trust yourself, I would say. Take the time to get to know yourself on a deeper level. And that means maybe some time off of the computer, off of your devices, so that, you can know yourself on a deeper level and begin to trust yourself. You have everything you need to have success in life, to have joy, to have happiness. You really do. But it's not like finding that path is, it's not in all the messaging that there's something wrong with us, that we have to fix, that we have to make a certain amount of money by a certain point, that we have to get married by a certain time. Like, those are all artificial constructs. And I just believe in the resiliency and the beauty that each human being has to bring to the earth, and that you really have something special to give. And it may take a little time to find that, but it begins with going in and not being afraid to see what's inside, and really, value your worth by virtue of being a human being. You are valuable. You are so valuable.
Wow. That is amazing, beautiful advice. And I think everybody should take that to heart. Thank you, Teri. Thank you, Teri Beckman, for traveling with me to the edges of lean.
Thank you, Bella. Such a pleasure. Really such a pleasure. Thank you for all of your work.
Thanks. You too.
This is Bella Engelbach, and I'd like to thank Teri Beckman for being my guest on the edges of lean. How are you building collaborative leadership in the places you work? We love to hear from you. Find Teri at LinkedIn or at HiGOL.co. That's HIGOL.co. And start a conversation. Find me at leanforhumans.com or on LinkedIn or wherever you watch or listen. And tell a friend about the edges of lean. Please join me in exploring more of the edges of lean. There's a lot to learn. And check out my friends in the Lean Communicators community at leancommunicators.com. You'll find more podcasts and videos with lots of great new content every week. The Edges of Lean is written and produced by Bella Engelbach with support from Podcast Inc. This is a Lean for Humans production.